What's happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show on DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forum's Twitter handle, that would be at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forum's Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. It's the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show. Normally, we would take a look at racing this upcoming weekend, April the 21st. Instead, this show is going to be a little bit different than what we're used to. There will be no preview show next week, so this week is going to be kind of the progress reports, or the report cards for the Derby contenders, the Derby horses that look to be trying to get into the gate, the ones that are in the top 20, the ones that are just outside of the top 20, trying to get in for the first Saturday in May. Last year, I did a few different rounds of progress reports. This year, for a number of reasons, here we are. Derby preps are over. Let's just go through and see how the prep season went for most of these horses and how it may sort of foreshadow things to come in the Kentucky Derby. If you listen to this podcast, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, number of ways for you to check this program out. If you listen on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. You will subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum's YouTube channel. You will get all of the latest offerings from DRF TV throughout the week. We will come back next week with a recap show of the racing from this upcoming weekend, but there will be no preview show next week. So that's why this show is happening now, and certainly a number of things can happen between now and our next preview show, which will be the Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby preview show. But I figured, again, this really is the only time that we can go through and do this. So we're going to go through, and we can, for the first time, take a look at what is the leaderboard. And it's not necessarily in point order, because Gronkowski will be the first horse that we'll talk about, just to make sure we know that he is in the gate. There is no question about it. There's no question about it for any of these horses with the points. But Gronkowski earned his way in through the European road to the Kentucky Derby. And you can see, I've given him a B as far as a grade is concerned. Now, how do these grades come about? Again, it's super subjective. And guess what? I'm the only one that's putting any info into it. So this is what I think. And for me, it boils down to not only how the horses have run in their prep races, but has everything gone to plan? Has what the initial intentions were, has everything gone on without a hiccup? Have they looked good and professional on the racetrack? Have they won? Have they run fast? Have they done X, Y, and Z? That's kind of where I go with all of these. So when you see a horse like Gronkowski, who everybody and their brother, we've heard the news that Rob Gronkowski has bought into this horse. He's going to be there at Churchill Downs. Everyone is licking their chops because this horse is going to be the underlay of the century. The reason I give him a B, though, is because he did what he was supposed to do. The connection set out. They said, you know what, we want to go through. They were under the impression they could carry their points over from the European road to the Kentucky Derby over here and have them kind of work, because they were going to run him in one of the final 100-point preps over here in the States on dirt. That, unfortunately, was not an option, so they stayed home. They ran in that Burradone Stakes, got the job done. He's nothing spectacular. If you look at some of his time form ratings, he is incredibly slow compared to some of our horses. I'm sure he'll get Lasix for the first Saturday in May, but I don't think that's going to be enough to move him up. But again, because everything has gone sort of according to plan for these folks, with the exception of not being able to come over here, and he has gone out and he has done what he needs to do on the racetrack, I give him a B. I don't think he has any chance in the Kentucky Derby, but, you know, look, he's coming over here. It's a good story. It'll be something that NBC, I'm sure, is going to run with. And for all of us that are gamblers, it's positive, because he's going to be overbet, because he's a name. He has a name that people are familiar with. And I don't think he has much of a chance in here. But again, a little bit of international flavor is never a bad thing in the Kentucky Derby. So Gronkowski is a B. Now we're going to go in point position order. So the horse that earned the most points throughout the prep season was Magnum Moon. Magnum Moon, we just saw most recently win the Arkansas Derby. We're going to take a look at his horse card. He is 4 of 4. He's over $1.1 million in career earnings. He's done nothing wrong for Todd Pletcher and company. The concerns for me are, is he fast enough? And I talked about this a little bit in the recap show. You can find that up on YouTube or on video.drf.com or iTunes, any number of ways. To me, it's not like he's getting any faster, and that could be a major concern, because the fastest horses of his generation already have run faster than he has significantly. The thought of them moving forward, even if he moves forward, he's not going to be fast enough to make up the ground. I made mention I didn't like the early lead change. I didn't like the drifting out down the lane. I think he's a nice horse, and it's always dangerous to discount horses that all they do is go out and win. But there's just a part of me that, as far as a Derby prospect is concerned, not sure I love his chances, But at the same time, I have to give him an A minus. The only reason I'm giving him the A minus as opposed to an A is because of those little things where, you know, the leads and the drifting out. Andy's a little bit slow. But all in all, really hard to knock a horse like this, that all he does is show up and get the job done. And he has great connections between Luis Saez and Todd Pletcher. The next horse that we're going to take a look at is Good Magic. Good Magic is the 2-year-old champion going out for Chad Brown. Won the Bluegrass most recently, 95 Beyer speed figure. He's going to need to improve and get back to what he ran in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year if he's going to have any chance to win this race. That's the only time he's cracked a triple-digit Beyer in his career. I think it's pretty clear that this year of all years, it's going to take something in that 100 range, if not higher, to win the Kentucky Derby. And I'm not entirely convinced that he is still at that form that he was as a 2-year-old. Now, even having said that, I was going to sound like I'm going back and using revisionist history, but if you go back and listen to some of the things that we talked about, I don't think he ran the best race in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, considering the impossible trip that Bolt Toro had. I thought his Fountain of Youth was very, very dull, and I didn't love his Bluegrass. So it's hard for me to get super excited about this horse. I suppose if you want to say that the 2-year-old champion, you're going to be able to get 7, 8, 10 to 1, something like that in the Kentucky Derby, that's fine. It's still, I'm not sure that really gets me going. And you can't tell me that this is how they wanted things to go for this horse. I understand you get that big win in the Bluegrass, and now all of a sudden you're ready to go. But pop him back to the left lead late, whether he jumped tracks or not. I didn't see any tracks, but I'm sure there are a number of other people that are saying that that's what the case was there. But he really had to work to put away Flame Away. Flame Away is a nice horse that we'll talk about in a little bit, but I don't think many people are looking at him as a prime contender for the Kentucky Derby. And he hasn't gotten faster. There's just enough in here for me with Good Magic. He's been a little bit lackluster for me as a 3-year-old. Who knows? Maybe he's ready to peak and he's sitting on a big effort. But as far as the prep season is concerned, B minus for me. Dull in that race down at Gulfstream. Workmanlike at best in the Bluegrass. And now you're saying that you're going to up your game, not just a little, but substantially to get the job done in Louisville. There's just, I don't know. It's not working for me. B minus for me for Good Magic. Audible for Todd Pletcher. 1 of 4 in here for Pletcher. This is going to be the first flat A that you are going to see as far as a grade is concerned, because I think he's really done nothing wrong, and it's hard to knock too much about this horse. It seems like it's been a little while, but just to refresh everyone's memory, this is Pete Aiello with the stretch run of the Florida Derby.
At the top of the stretch, Audible let loose on the outside to take the lead from Mississippi, who's back to second. Hofberg straightens up and tries to finish up with less than 1/8 of a mile to go. It's the Holy Bull winner, Audible, who's clear. Audible by 3. Hofberg can't get him. Mississippi is third. 5 Florida Derbies for Todd Pletcher. Audible, no doubt about it.
Very impressive winning that day. Very impressive winning the Holy Bull. The Holy Bull, mechanically, he did everything wrong. Here in this race in the Florida Derby, he did everything right. He looked very, very good. I suppose if you really want to go through the fine-tooth comb, there was a serious pace for him to run at, as well as Hofberg, and we'll talk about Hofberg here in a little bit, but this horse has shown the ability to run fast. He's shown the ability to finish races. He's paired up 99s in his 2 starts as a 3-year-old. As far as buyers are concerned, from a time form standpoint, he's right there. If you think there's a forward move in this horse, I'm always a little bit concerned about Into Mischief going longer once they get out past 9 furlongs, but you know what? I could say the same thing for a number of sires in here, and how many of these horses truly want 1.25 miles. I think I can count on one hand how many actually look like they want additional distance. I don't have much to knock about Audible, especially if you believe there's a scenario where he's going to go off in that 8-to-1 range. All of a sudden, he looks like he could be a series value kind of play in a race like the Kentucky Derby, because if you think that Justify is going to get bet, if you think Mendelssohn's going to get bet, if you think Good Magic may take some nibbles, Bolt Toro, Magnum Moon, we already talked about Gronkowski, whether you think he has a chance or not, he's going to take some money. I'd imagine he'll probably be in that 15-to-1 range when he should be about 500-to-1. Audible, I think, is a very, very interesting horse. He is one that I'm having a serious time reconsidering how I thought about him early on, coming out of that Holy Bull, coming out of the Florida Derby as we get closer and closer to the Kentucky Derby, because he really checks basically every box in here. Audible, very, very interesting, and for me, it's been an A, a perfect sort of prep season to get ready for a race like the Kentucky Derby. Another Todd Pletcher entrant is Noble Indy. Noble Indy, I'm going to give him a B+ simply because he's lightly raced, and there are a lot of things that he has done well in a short amount of time, and I feel like he is completely overlooked as far as the Pletcher entrants are concerned, and really as far as Derby contenders are concerned. He won one of those 100-point preps. I stressed that at the beginning of the 100-point prep season, that the way that ever since this point system has been implemented, the only horses that have won the Kentucky Derby also won the 100-point preps. So in theory, that gives you 7 horses that, if you believe that that trend continues, 7 horses can win the Kentucky Derby. Noble Indy being one of them, coming out of the Louisiana Derby. He won that race in a very impressive fashion, considering he was close to a runoff speed horse and close to legitimate fractions, and he was the only one that stuck around. The moves that were making, that were sort of the competitive ones, were coming from the back of the pack, including Lone Sailor and My Boy Jack. We saw My Boy Jack come back to flatter that form, winning the Lexington last weekend. Noble Indy, that was his first time with blinkers on. He's still lightly raced. If you think you're going to get a forward move, he's yet to take a step backward as far as speed figures are concerned on a number of scales, not just Beyer, not just time form, some other numbers as well. He's not taking steps back. He continues to improve. He's an interesting one, I think, that's going to get really lost in the shuffle. Wouldn't be surprised if he's in that 15-1 range. And I think he probably has a puncher's chance. I don't know that he's the most likely win contender, but I think he's got a puncher's chance in here, all things considered. Give him a B+ for that entire prep season, because the Risen Star, it was, that track at the Fairgrounds was a little bit weird that day. Comes back with the blinkers on, which again, historically is not a good move for Pletcher. Blinkers on going into a graded stakes race. He overcomes that, sits close to that fast pace, holds on, turns the other horses away that were coming from the back of the pack. I thought it was a good effort, and I think he's an interesting runner, depending on where you think he's going to be positioned in the running. Noble Indy, a B+ as far as his prep season is concerned. Vino Rosso, the last of the Pletchers that we will touch on here. He is another horse that it seems like I've liked this horse for a while. I think there's some ability here. Dan Illman was the first one. He and I were in the office back in New York late last year, probably October, November. Well, it must have been November, because this horse debuted on November the 11th. And he said, I think I like Vino Rosso. And this was at the same time that I found Instilled Regard. And I said, I kind of like Instilled Regard a little bit. Vino Rosso is a horse that it's been I don't think he is a complete work yet. I think it's taken a little bit of time for him to figure things out. And you can see that Todd put blinkers on. He still runs in spots, I think, even including the Wood Memorial that we saw most recently. It seemed like on the far turn he was moving well, but I don't know that he's put an entire race together, and that is an interesting proposition, because I don't think distance is going to be a problem for him at all. I think actually as distances get longer, he's going to get better. He's one of the few in this sort of field that I think will appreciate the distance. If you think that he moves forward from the wood, it was his second start in the blinkers, and it was his most complete race to date, and yet I still don't think it was a complete race. I think he's still running in some spots, still figuring some things out. If you think there's a forward move there, all of the sudden, again, Vino Rosso is the kind of horse that maybe everybody else is looking at a Justify, and a Mendelssohn, and a Bolt d'Oro, and a Good Magic, and a Magnum Moon, and an Audible. And next thing you know, Vino Rosso's 20-1, and he should be sitting a beautiful trip where he's in mid-pack. It let the speeds go, because it looks like it's going to be an honestly run race. I can't imagine they're going to crawl out there. And Vino Rosso comes, and you know that final eighth of a mile is not going to be a problem for this horse. Could be a problem for some of the other contenders, particularly the ones that are up there on the front end. So Vino Rosso, I gave him a B simply because that run 2 back in the Tampa Bay Derby, and really both of his runs at Tampa. He got onto the far turn looking like he was going to move, and then he just started spinning his wheels. So I don't know if, again, was it just a little bit of immature figuring things out? Maybe it was Tampa Bay Downs. Who knows? That can occasionally be a little bit of a quirky racetrack, but I don't really want to say that because he won his last start as a 2-year-old right before New Year's Day at Tampa Bay, going 2 turns against, albeit a completely overmatched field. But it's one of those things where this horse, if you believe that it's an imperfect work of art right here, or an imperfect and incomplete project, but potentially it will be completed on May 5th, you could be looking at a very, very nice price on a Todd Pletcher trained horse that John Velasquez, I believe, is going to be riding. You could do a heck of a lot worse than Vino Rosso. Gave him a B. Bolt d'Oro is the next horse that we'll talk about here as far as grades are concerned on the Matt Bernier Show, the preview edition. Bolt d'Oro is a horse that I've always been a big, big fan of. I thought his 2-year-old campaign was tremendous. I voted for him for 2-year-old champion. I understand he lost the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, finished third behind Good Magic and Solomini, but I thought it was an impossible trip. And if you had given either one of those horses that finished ahead of him that trip, they would have done, I think, worse than Bolt D'Oro did. I think he ran that well in spite of the trip. He's come back here in his 3-year-old campaign, and he has not run poorly in either one of his starts. Technically, he finished first by disqualification in that run 2 starts back in the San Felipe. The Santa Anita Derby, look, he was in a very unenviable position. I don't know if the plan all along was just to say, Justify, go out there, do your thing, walk on the front end, and then we'll try to run you down. Or it was, let's have a target, let's take a shot, and if we don't get there, we don't get there. We don't really care. We've got bigger fish to fry. We've got our eye on bigger prizes. I hope it was that latter. I hope it was a scenario where we don't care if he beats us today. Let him get his. We'll get him in a few weeks. And Mick Ruiz has said as much. That's kind of how it sounds anyway with this horse. If you took Justify's name out of it and said that, you know what, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. This horse has arguably run 2 of the best prep races to date, Bolt D'Oro. Now, he didn't hit the line first in either one of them. He was put up to first in that 2 starts back, but he was soundly defeated in the most recent start. But if you just look at the races themselves and you take the names away from anything, he's run 2 of the best races prep-wise for a 3-year-old this year. No question about it. I think he actually has a pretty good chance in the Kentucky Derby. I don't think 1.25 miles is a problem for him. If you think someone else is going to go and keep Justify company on the front end and Bolt D'Oro can be the one to sit 2 or 3 lengths off of it and come with his run, and you would think 3rd start of the form cycle, he's going to be sitting on go. I think Bolt D'Oro has a giant chance in here. I gave him a B as far as a grade is concerned just because, again, it took him a little while to get back to the races. He missed his initial prep just because of a couple little bumps and bruises. He comes back. He's got a serious battle in the San Felipe with McKinsey. Can't get it done. I was a little bit disappointed in that, but at the same time, considering it was his first start since the Breeders' Cup, how harsh can I be? And then he comes back, and just the way that race was run in the Santa Anita Derby, I don't think he had any chance to go and get Justify. And I understand Justify might just be a superior animal, but I don't know if I'm ready to just entirely, anoint Justify as the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think he's a tremendous talent, but I think Bolt D'Oro is a pretty darn special horse as well. And I think there are some other really good horses in this race too. So we'll get to Justify a little bit more momentarily, but Bolt D'Oro, don't sleep on him. Don't just immediately pitch him out, because I think there's a real scenario to think that you're going to get the best race of his life on May 5th. Let's move on to Enticed for Kieran McLaughlin, the only Godolphin entrant in here right now. As far as Enticed is concerned, I gave him a B- because for a couple things. I don't think additional distance is going to be his friend. He was handled in the Wood Memorial. I know he got body slammed at the top of the lane by Vino Rosso, but I don't think he was ever winning that race anyways. The Gotham was a very, very impressive effort, but when you look and see who he defeated Old Time Revival and Free Drop Billy and some other lesser horses. It's not as impressive as it may have looked visually. And then you go back to the Holy Bull when he was getting some dirt kicked in his face, and he just really never picked his feet up. So I kind of look at this horse and say, get me back to a 1-turn mile. I would love him in the Pat Day Mile. I don't love him in the Kentucky Derby. I gave him a B-. He's going to be one of the middling prices that I don't think I'm going to have him anywhere. I think I'll just try to beat him. I think he's a talented horse, but I keep saying it over and over. I feel like he's going to be like his mom. I feel like it's tricky. She was tremendous at those middle distances, and as they got longer, she didn't get better. You keep this horse right in that 8.5 furlong range. And I know there's not a lot of 8.5 furlong races, but you keep him right in that mile-ish number. I think Enticed is one of the best 3-year-olds that there is. You get him out to 1.25 miles, I don't love his chances. B- for me for Enticed. Let's go to Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn comes in for Aidan O'Brien. Aidan O'Brien's trying to win the Kentucky Derby for the first time in his career. We are trying to have the first European come over here, or one of the first Europeans to actually win a classic. There have been others, but in a long time, we haven't had one. I think Mendelssohn's run in the UAE Derby was fantastic. We're going to take a look at his horse card right now. The pedigree is well known. He's a half to Beholder. He's a half to Into Mischief. He's by Scat Daddy. Tons to like there. Tons to like with the UAE Derby performance as a whole. It was run on an intensely speed-friendly racetrack at Meydan that night on World Cup night. The inside certainly didn't hurt. I don't think it was nearly as strong as many people are making it out to be. That's just my opinion. But my bigger piece is, okay, he won by 18 and a half lengths. Bias or no bias. Horses don't generally win by 18 lengths in major graded races. And when they do, it's a superior performance. When you look at some of the figures that have been assigned, Bayer and company assigned a 106. Timeform US, 128. Those numbers are very, very comparable to a horse like Justify. They're faster than a horse like Audible. They're faster than some other runners. Now, if you want to look at it and say he's going to be a bad bet because he's coming off of a bias-aided victory, I'm not going to argue with the fact that he's coming off of a bias-aided victory. I will argue to a degree, depending on what the price is on this horse, that it's a good or a bad bet. Because I have to be honest with you, I don't personally believe that a horse like Mendelssohn at 6-1 is necessarily a bad bet. If he is almost as fast, if not as fast, as the best horse in the race, which most people believe to be Justify, with more seasoning, why should I look at 6-1 and say that's a bad bet as opposed to 5-2 on Justify? I just, again, well documented. I'm a big fan of this horse. I think he's incredibly talented. I think he can win from on the lead. I think he can win from off the lead. I don't think he's going to be too far out of it here in this race. He was setting legitimate fractions. If you go through and break it down, you can go in to Trackus at Meydan. He ran. I think this horse is very, very good. I gave him the A-, though, because he defeated probably a suspect field. There's no question about that. And you have to acknowledge he did it on a speed-friendly racetrack, so that's why it's not an A. A-, I think he's a major, major player when he comes over here if everything goes as planned for Aidan O'Brien. Let's get to the big horse. Justify. Looks like he is the bee's knees. He has done nothing wrong in 3 lifetime starts. He has won going 7/8, a flat mile, and 9 furlongs. He has won on a muddy sealed track. He has won on fast tracks. He has won from pressing the pace. He has won from outright on it. And his most recent effort was probably the most important and impressive race of the entire 3-year-old campaign for any horse here in the United States. Let's refresh our memory. This is the stretch run of the Santa Anita Derby.
Justify reaching the top of the stretch. Back in third is Core Beliefs, then Instilled Regard, Pepe Tonio. Justify leading past the 8th pole. He's a couple of lengths in front. Bolt Doro is closing on the inside. It's Justify by 3/4 of a length. Bolt Doro trying ever so hard, but Justify, another exhilarating exhibition by the supremely gifted athlete.
And he turned away a very, very good horse again, as we've talked about with Bolt Doro. Justify, there is nothing really to knock about him. The 107 Bayer is the fastest in the entire group. The 132 Timeform US rating, that would be fast as far as older horses is concerned. He has 3 consecutive races to start his career over 100. Actually, his lowest Bayer is a 101. Other figures have him incredibly fast. There's not a heck of a lot to knock. The only sort of things that I would throw out there, and I give him an A, flat A. It's hard to give him anything other than an A. The only thing that I would throw out there is he's never shipped out. All 3 of his races have come in Santa Anita. It's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing that I don't know how he's going to handle the ship. We saw that Unique Bello was not the most comfortable last Friday afternoon in the Apple Blossom. Whether that was because of the ship, whether it was because of just unfamiliar surroundings, whatever it may be. Justify needs to prove, and look, I have no reason to believe until there is an issue that he's not going to be able to do it, but it's just one of those things. At 5-2, is Justify a good bet in this race? It depends on what you think, and again, if you break down the numbers and you think that 5-2 is value on a horse that might be, some people are anointing him as a super horse. Maybe he is. I don't know. We'll find out. I want to know what happens when he gets some more serious early pace thrown at him, because he had a very cushy setup, and I understand, adjusted fractions. Craig Milkowski with Timeform US, they had those fractions, the 47 and 4, they adjusted those to be considerably faster considering how the racetrack was playing. But I want to know what happens when he is pushed by a good horse on the front end. He's not going to be by himself on the front. I can't imagine that he is. And if he is, There's going to be somebody breathing down his neck, whether it's Mendelssohn, whether it's Flame Away, whether it's, you name it, Noble Indy. Someone's going to be there with him. He's not going to be loose on the front end. And if he is, he's going entirely too fast. I think Justify is an unbelievable talent. We will find out if ultimately he lives up to the billing and lives up to the hype, because he's going to be every bit of the major favorite that people are making him out to be. I don't know that he'll get into the 2-to-1 range, but I think 5-2 is what you're looking at as far as Justify is concerned on May 5th at Churchill Downs. No reason to knock anything that he's done, though. He's been perfect. Give him a flat A as far as a grade is concerned. Quip for Rodolphe Brissett. We saw him most recently last weekend in the Arkansas Derby. I thought he ran okay there. No match for Magnum Moon. 2 starts back, though. I thought it was a very, very encouraging effort in a race that I didn't really know where it came from. Here's the stretch run of the Tampa Bay Derby.
Swings wide for the drive as they straighten away for home. World of Trouble and Quip on the outside. They're locked in battle. Flame Away racing erratically down to the wire. World of Trouble along the rail and Quip on the outside. They're still heads apart. Quip is now going the better of the 2, and Flame Away flying on late, getting up for second.
Impressive effort. I like the fact that he was able to sit and make up a move. Again, the Arkansas Derby for me, as a whole, the race just seems kind of slow. And the only horse as far as a Derby contender that you would want to really consider out of that, in my opinion, would be Magnum Moon. And I've already made it clear that I have some questions about Magnum Moon coming up here in 3 weeks. So I don't know if I'm loving a horse like Quip as far as a race like the Derby is concerned. Going forward, though, these more middle distance races at a mile and an eighth, that was only his second start as a 3-year-old. I don't know. I'm not saying that I think, going way down the road, but like a race like the Haskell, I think that could be an interesting spot for a horse like Quip. Forwardly placed, we know Monmouth generally is going to be a little bit more tilted toward the front end. I think he could easily be a horse like that, or way down the road, a Pennsylvania Derby type. I'm just not entirely convinced that a mile and a quarter is going to be his friend. And again, that's kind of the unknown and the X factor for a number of these horses, including this next horse, the horse that ran second in the Tampa Bay Derby, Flame Away. I think Flame Away is a really cool horse, arguably the most likable horse in the race. And I don't mean that from, a fan standpoint, but can you find anyone that really has a serious, beef with Flame Away? He's no good, he's no good. I've never heard anyone say that. I think Flame Away, he tries. And really, that's all you can ask for from a racehorse. I don't know that he is of the same talent. Oh, by the way, I gave Quip a B. I don't know that he's of the same talent as a Justify or a Magnum Moon or a Mendelssohn or a Bolt D'Oro or a Good Magic or any of those horses. But I love the try in him. He goes out there and he runs. He tries. He doesn't want to lose. I just wonder if, that'll get you so far. Mile and a quarter is going to be interesting to find out if he can handle the distance, if he sees out the distance. Because if he does, and I've said this for the past handful of months, he is an Ontario bred. And if he can handle the distance, I wouldn't be surprised at all if a race like the Queen's Plate came into play. Because we have seen him run well on turf already. We have seen him run well on synthetic. That's where he broke his maiden up at Woodbine back in May. So this horse has done a lot of running in a short amount of time. I think Flame Away is a very cool horse. Also wouldn't totally surprise me. If you're looking for just a much bigger number of a horse that's going to be forwardly placed, why can't Flame Away run something like a Shackelford did a number of years ago in the Derby? I know Shackelford went out there and they went very, very slow. But Flame Away is the kind of horse that he's just not going to relinquish. He wants to fight. Now, maybe the talent won't carry him along, but why can't he hang around to run fourth? Who knows? Just throwing things out there. I think Flame Away is a really neat horse. I just don't love him as far as a Derby contender is concerned. But as far as the prep season goes, I gave him a B. Now we're going to pick up the pace here going through some of these horses. Wanted to really give a nice little touch on each one of some of those top upper-level contenders. Now we get into sort of the muddier water, maybe the horses that are more likely to round out exotics than necessarily be win contenders. Solomini is a nice horse. I don't know if there's physical issues or he's just not matured and he hasn't moved forward from 2 to 3. He tried in the Arkansas Derby, didn't really work. The Rebel, he probably needed that. That was on the heels of getting sick and missing some time and just a number of things. This 3-year-old campaign for a Baffert trainee, a well-regarded Baffert trainee, is about as sideways as I can remember one going for Baffert. And that's not meant to be a knock against anyone. It's just sometimes things don't work out the way that you had intended or hoped they would. And I think that's how it goes with Solomini. I think the horse hasn't moved forward, and I just think there were a number of things going against him. I gave him a C here as far as his Derby preps are concerned. Bravazzo for Wayne Lucas won that race 2 starts back in the Risen Star over a very bizarre run at the fairgrounds where it seemed like nobody could make up any ground. In that race, for the day, it seemed like the track was fine. That race was just kind of a merry-go-round. He comes back, something a bit bizarre happens in the Louisiana Derby, basically pulled up on the far turn. If you take that out and you go back to the Risen Star, maybe he's good enough for a minor award. The problem is, outside of that race and the Oaklawn race 3 back, he doesn't have anything that's remotely close to making him a fringe contender or an exotic player for a race like the Derby. To me, Bravazzo, and the other thing too is, how's he going to be ridden? Is he going to be ridden forward like we saw 2 starts back? Or is he going to be trying to come from out of it like we had seen sort of at the end of his 2-year-old campaign and early in that race at Oaklawn, coming from 5-6 lengths out of it? So I don't know what you're going to get out of him. Personally, I've never loved him, but I can understand some minor, mild appeal for a big number that's likely to come with some sort of a run. B- for him. My boy Jack, we're going to take a look at his horse card right now. This is the winner of the Lexington most recently for Keith DeSormo. They put all their eggs into that one basket. He had to win the Lexington to get in. He did so. I thought it was a promising effort. This is a horse that's going to come with a nice run. I sound like a broken record. I want him back on turf. I think he could be the best 3-year-old on turf. Well, one of. Probably not as good as Analyze It, but nobody's as good as Analyze It, I don't think. I think this is a really talented horse. I like everything about him. I just don't know, ultimately, is this running style going to work? We talk about it. If you're a one-run closer, you're always going to be at the mercy of pace and trip, particularly in a 20-horse race. I'm going to give him a B, though, because things have worked out nicely for him. He's a multiple graded stakes winner here as a 3-year-old. He's done some really good things. And you go back to last year, he's a stakes winner on turf. This is a really nice horse. A lot of talent is here. I wonder, where does he fit as far as a race like the Derby is concerned? Promises fulfilled. Winner of the Fountain of Youth 2 starts back when he walked the dog on the front end, comes back, gets into an unbelievable pitch battle early on in a pace duel, is essentially eased. Give him a B-. You've got to assume he's going to be forwardly ridden in this race, the Kentucky Derby. I have to be honest with you, I don't know that there's a scenario where I can envision him winning this race, but maybe he can be a thorn in the side of some of the big boys, the Justifies of the world, and everybody else that's going to be forwardly placed. Gave him a B-. Horse that I've been very disappointed in is Free Drop Billy. Free Drop Billy is a horse that I thought was going to be something serious here as a 3-year-old based on the way that he had run early on. When he ran in the Holy Bull, I thought it was a winning effort, and he got turned away by Audible, who we have seen Audible come back to do bigger and better things. Then all of a sudden, Romans calls a last-second Audible, no pun intended, and sends him up to New York to run in the Gotham, a one-turn race, which, to me, I never liked the idea of that because he's always felt like longer is better. So why are we going to go one-turn mile? Disaster. He just never really picked his feet up, never seemed comfortable, runs 3rd. Then he comes back in the Bluegrass over the Keeneland surface, which he was already a Grade 1 winner as a 2-year-old over, and he's just kind of a flat and even 4th. This is a horse, to me, if I'm using him underneath only as a horse that can just come maybe and outstay everyone else. I gave him a C. Lone Sailor for Tom Amoss. I like this horse in the Louisiana Derby. Gave me a bit of a thrill. I don't know if it was a combination of him not going by, but at the same time, look, he had put a length on Noble Indy, the eventual winner, and I just think Noble Indy came back on him. Noble Indy just might have idled a little bit once he hit the front there. Thought his job was done. For what it's worth, again, my boy Jack, we just saw him come back to win the Lexington, so that form is flattered a little bit. Lone Sailor has gone from 0 to 100 in a short amount of time. The pedigree, he acts like he wants to go farther, but I do wonder, did we hit the sort of threshold at the 1.125 miles? Does that extra 1/8 of a mile help him? Not entirely convinced that it does. Gave him a B as far as preps are concerned. Hofburg is a very, very interesting horse. I listened to the DRF Players podcast earlier in the week, or might have been last week, and Jonathan Kinchin said he thought that Hofburg had that wise guy feel. I agree 100%. I am very, very interested in this horse. Perhaps this ends up being the underlay of the race because based on what he's done, he's still eligible for a non-winners of 2 lifetime or non-winners of 2 other than, but he ran so well in that Florida Derby, and he looks like a horse that distance is going to be his friend, that as more racing comes, he's going to get better, and he's in the best hands with Bill Mott. I think he's very, very talented. I gave him a B+, and I'm going to be very, very curious to see how he trains at Churchill Downs. We have heard for a number of years, whether you believe it or not, that's your prerogative and your opinion, that the dirt course at Churchill can lend itself to turf horses. Why? I don't really know. Again, I'm not a workout guy or anything else like that. But if you believe that, this horse is bred for turf as well. And there's no reason to think that he wouldn't be able to transition over to a racetrack like Churchill Downs. We'll find out. Again, these next 10 days, or the 10 days leading up to the Kentucky Derby, are probably the most important. They're also probably the most overanalyzed workouts you're ever going to see. But Hofburg is a very, very fascinating horse. I think he's probably going to be a slight underlay compared to what he should be. But at the same time, if they go fast early, who's to say that he doesn't take a step forward and come with a big run? I thought he ran well in the Florida Derby, just not well enough. I think he's very, very interesting in the Kentucky Derby. Forense Fire, I give him a C-. I don't want this to sound overly critical or overly harsh. I don't think this horse has any chance at a 1.25 miles. I think he would have a big chance in the Pat Day Mile. I think he would be even better suited going shorter than that. I think he's a 7 furlong kind of horse. But if you so want to go 1-turn mile, he's a 1-turn mile winner, a grade 1 winner as a 2-year-old in the Champagne. I think Forense Fire is a nice horse. I would be, you could knock me over with a feather if he were to win the Kentucky Derby. And the way that this prep season has gone, the Jerome worked out well, thought he ran well. Comes back in the Withers, no match for Avery Island, who would have been a legitimate player in this race. But then they continued. The 1-turn mile, that was the one that concerned me in the Gotham, because he never really picked his feet up there, and that bothered me. That's supposed to be your bread and butter. And then the Wood, it just didn't work for him, and distance is not going to be his friend. C-, I just don't like the way that things have gone. Get him back to a shorter distance. Combatant. Now we're in the horses that are outside of the body. They're going to need some help, need a couple of defections to get in, and we will quickly rip through them. Combatant, he's 1 for 7 lifetime, 4 times second or third. He reminds me of Untrapped. I think he wants shorter, and right now he's nothing more than a nibbler. B-. Instilled Regard, he is on the list. Selfishly, I hope he just gets into the field for me and Lee Davis's sake, so we can have something to root for the first Saturday in May in the big one. He has not moved forward from that Lecomte, which is very, very disappointing. The Risen Star, though, if I'm going to sit there and make the excuse for a horse like Noble Indy and knock a horse like Bravazzo and Snapper Sinclair because the racetrack was a little bit weird for that race, then I can certainly do that for Instilled Regard. And the Santa Anita Derby, in my opinion, he had no chance to win that race or even really get that close with the way that it was run, because they didn't push Justify at all early on. Bolt Doro was never going to relinquish second from there. I suppose maybe it's disappointing that this horse couldn't get up to finish ahead of Core Beliefs, but it was essentially a merry-go-round. If he gets in, he's bred all day to run 1.25 miles. He may not be a likely win candidate, but if he gets in, he would be one that I think you should consider using underneath if you're playing a trifecta or a superfecta. Give him a B-. Snapper Sinclair, B-. Very similar to what I was just talking about. The fact that Bravazzo and they kind of took advantage of that racetrack. Louisiana Derby, he didn't really pick his feet up. I don't think he has much of a chance if he gets in. Blended Citizen is an interesting runner in my opinion. I gave him a B as far as his prep season is concerned. We're going to go back to his victory 2 starts back. This is Blended Citizen winning the Jeff Ruby Stakes.
Comet is coming at him. Through from between horses, Blended Citizen. Aerowalk is next. Pony Up in Zanesville is finishing with good energy down the stand side as they have an 1/8 of a mile to go. And Muggeritz is still there. Way out wide. Here comes Zanesville. Between horses, Aerowalk as a racing deep stretch. Pony Up emerges. Pony Up to the outside. Blended Citizen to the inside. Down to the wire. A photo finish that goes to Blended Citizen, who's 1 step closer to a...
I like the way that he finished there. He got a great ride by Kyle Frey. And I like the way that he finished in the Bluegrass. He, all of a sudden, if he gets in, now he's going to need a lot of help now to get in. But if he were to get in, all of a sudden he becomes the kind of horse that he's going to finish. 1.25 miles is not going to be a problem for him. If they throw it down early, I don't know that he can win the race, but he can certainly come with a little bit of a run. And at least that run in the Bluegrass, that finish, made me think that, maybe the dirt, it's probably not his best surface, but maybe he can actually get over it. And again, if the pace heats up, maybe he can come with a little bit of a run. Gave his prep season a B. Reride. I liked him in the UA Derby. He got absolutely blown out by Mendelssohn. If you believe the buyer, he had regressed back to what he was running prior to that Mind That Bird Derby. A low to mid-70, simply not fast enough, gave him a B-. Dream Baby Dream, another Asmussen runner. This is a horse that's 1 for 9 overall. He's going to come from the back of the pack. He's going to need a ton of help to get in. He would need an absolute miracle, I believe, to get into the race, and then also to be competitive in there. And the last horse we will touch on is Restoring Hope for Bob Baffert. The reason that he's the last one I'll touch on, I give him a B- for what it's worth, because he only had one prep. He ran in the Wood Memorial. He ran third. I believe Restoring Hope could be a horse. I don't even want to say could be. If you could give me a future book right now for the Belmont Stakes, I think I would bet on Restoring Hope. He has the ability to be forwardly placed. I'm not sure why he got so far shuffled back early on in that race up at Aqueduct, but I know he can be more forward than that. Just go to those runs 2 and 3 back. And he is the horse that's going to crank out 24-2, 24-2, 24-2. He's not going to do anything brilliant. But I think he is a true stayer. And I think, again, Belmont, that's how that race is won. Forwardly placed, just clip off even fractions. Nothing brilliant. Just get out there and outstay everyone. I think Restoring Hope, if they were to run him in a race like the Belmont Stakes, they'd have an enormous chance in there for Baffert and company. So there you go. And let's just quickly, if we could, guys in the studio, let's run through the leaderboard one more time, and we'll just keep it up there for a little bit. Again, this is nothing more than what I think as far as these prep seasons and the prep races have gone for each one of these horses and the connections involved. Did everything go according to plan? Did they have the missed time? How have they looked on the racetrack? How do they look from a figure standpoint? Where are they going to be positioned in the race? X, Y, and Z. Just a fun little thing to go out there and see how these horses have fared leading into the Kentucky Derby. We will find out. Again, more and more time goes by. We will have training beginning. I believe Lone Sailor, this is being taped on Thursday. He worked this morning at Churchill Downs at something like 57-3, which is like lightning. I don't know if the track was basically playing like asphalt or if the horse was just cooking out there, but that's a big-time workout, and you'll see more and more horses getting ready to ship into Louisville for the first Saturday in May. So again, apologize if we're not going over any races this week. You can find all of the previews and all sorts of other good nuggets over on video.drf.com or the Daily Racing Forums YouTube channel. If you have been watching this live.drf.com, livestream.com, the social media pages for the Racing Forum, thank you for doing so. If you've been listening, podcast, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, again, thank you as well. Follow me on Twitter, @Bernier_Matt. Questions, comments, concerns, whatever else it may be. If you have been listening live, you've already listened to the DRF Players Podcast with Peter Thomas Fornatal and Jonathan Kinchin. And as we always do on the preview show, we will get you ready for the latest edition of Out of the Gate. We're going to lead right into that. Myself and Mike Beer anchoring the coverage this week, but you'll also get all the other usual suspects coming in, giving their 2 cents on a number of different things all across the racing world. For this upcoming weekend, we are getting down to it, the nitty-gritty leading in to the Kentucky Derby, and let's not forget about the Kentucky Oaks the first Friday in May. As far as this program is concerned, next week there will be the recap show that will come on Tuesday. There will be no preview show next week. So this one will probably rerun this show again next Friday. And then the following week, we will have the recap edition. It's not going to be recapping anything from the following week's racing. It'll be end up talking about these prep races. We'll go over all the preps and just kind of give a little bit of one final run through and a refresh for anybody getting ready, doing their handicapping. They'll draw the Kentucky Derby. And then the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show for that first week in May. We will have the Kentucky Oaks. We'll have the Kentucky Derby as well as some other stakes action down at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's what's on deck. Without further ado, let's lead into the latest edition of Out of the Gate. Good luck this weekend, however you're playing, whatever you're playing, wherever you're playing. This has been the Matt Bernier Show.